Facebook on the defensive again. It now says no European users' data was shared in the privacy scandal, which is the reverse of what it said before. So why the flip? And will it change anyone's mind? This is Inside Story. Hello and welcome to the programme. I'm Peter Dobbie. Now, Facebook says no European users' information may have been shared with the UK firm at the centre of the privacy scandal after all. But at their hearing, the social media network's executive said they still had to conduct an internal audit to confirm that. Facebook had previously said data from up to 2.7 million EU users had been improperly shared with Cambridge Analytica. That's the firm reportedly hired to influence Britain's Brexit referendum and the US election campaign that saw Donald Trump getting into the White House. The Facebook founder, Mark Zuckerberg, has apologised and pledged to apply new European data protection rules globally. But has that happened yet? Well, that's the key question for our guests in just a moment. Before we get to the discussion, here's a reminder of how the Facebook scandal unfolded. On March the 17th, millions of Facebook users woke up to the news that their personal information had been acquired by the data company Cambridge Analytica. The revelations coming from the co-founder of the UK-based company, a man called Christopher Wiley. The data was reportedly sold to Cambridge Analytica and used for political purposes linked to the 2016 US presidential election campaign and also the Brexit campaign. The company said the data was destroyed in 2015, but there were reports not all of it was actually deleted. Facebook then confirmed that up to 87 million users' details may have been improperly shared. It also goes back to 2014, when 270,000 users took an online personality survey via a third-party quiz. This gave access not only to their Facebook information, but to that of their friends. Facebook says it was a violation of company policy. OK, let's get going. Let's bring in our guest. Joining us here on Inside Story from Palo Alto, California on Skype is Larry Magid, CEO of connectsafely.org. That's an internet safety and privacy and security organisation in London, Nishanth Sastry, senior lecturer in the Department of Informatics at King's College London, and joining us from Brussels on Skype, Eva Kaili, a member of the European Parliament and the chair of the Parliament's Science and Technology Options Assessment. A warm welcome to you all. Let's just talk to you first, Nishanth Sastry in London. What does this mean for the people who thought their data had been accessed?
Well, it basically means that their details have not been revealed to some rogue company. So it's good news for these people, but it's not so good news still for the US citizens and others whose data has been leaked to Cambridge Analytica.
And Larry Magid in California, does this mean that people trust Facebook less or more than they did back in May when this scandal broke?
I doubt if it has much impact on people's trust of Facebook. As it was said, it's good that Europe may not have been impacted in the way the U.S. was, but it's still a big issue in the U.S. And I must say that the victims are not just those whose information was taken, but everybody who believes in democracy, whose vote may not have been counted in the way, or maybe it was counted, but whose election outcomes may have been influenced as a result of this and other campaigns.
Eva Kaili in Brussels, the scope of the GDPR, does that go far enough? Because that basically means that people that you click on I accept with, they have to tell you, they have to confess and say, no, your information will or will not go to other people.
Well, first, let me say that at least GDPR arrived. Maybe we should have been faster, but it's there. And it can create some global standards on how we treat data. So this means people, citizens, have now the option to control their data. They can take them away. They can ask for transparency with what is happening with their data. And basically, they can choose if they should deny or allow access to this data. So I think giving them back control is the first thing that happened. But because innovation is happening really fast, I still believe we have to improve GDPR to add more requirements, give more options to the citizens to be able to understand who the third parties are, who you're sharing your data with, and to explain, of course, the consequences in wording that even grandparents would understand, that they are familiar with the technology and they use Facebook, but they don't understand the small letters and they don't know exactly where their data are being held and how they can be misused. So we're working to improve that. We have more legislation coming, but I think the main principles are set out with GDPR.
Okay, Larry Magid back in California. Facebook is promising an internal audit. What are the key questions for you that it has to address?
Well, I think the main question is, are there systems in place today that could prevent this type of thing from happening again? Have they, tightened up sufficiently the access that their third-party developers have to the data, and also have they increased their own surveillance techniques? And by surveillance, I don't mean spying on people, but the ability to surveil the apps that they know that these things can't happen again. So they have to have very robust systems with their software and their servers to prevent these types of things from happening in the future.
Nishanth, Sastry in London, I mean, people, users and politicians, they were frustrated, I guess, by the reality of the revelations, but also by Facebook's reaction to other people's reaction to the revelation, surely.
Yeah, so I guess the part of the predicament is that we have all started to use Facebook in such, and it's embedded in such deep ways in our daily lives that we feel as if we are betrayed by these kind of revelations, that somebody that you trusted with sort of the basic bits of your life has now given away that data to someone else. So it should be made clear that Facebook has been tightening up and has cleaned up after itself in quite significant ways, but it still feels as though they could be doing a little bit more. It also feels like they've already given away some amount of data, and that's part of the frustration. And I think this is also in some ways normal, in the sense that the technology is evolving very fast, as Eva was saying, and in many of the tech companies are putting up new functionalities before completely realizing what the consequences of these are. And so it's a consequences of the evolving landscape that we have here.
Eva, is that part of the problem? In your last answer, you were talking about more legislation still to come, but unless the legislation chimes perfectly with where the technology is going, people like yourself, the European MEPs, you're always going to be playing catch-up.
Well, that's true, but this is because innovation cannot follow the rules. Innovation takes place by thinking out of the box. So we have to move fast, but we cannot move faster, because then we could block innovation. What I can say is that in order not to happen again, we have to make sure that people understand their perception can be manipulated by the news feed. So this is not about fake news. It's about the content that you see. So if you see a lot of happy content or scary content, this could change your mood, this could affect your options and your choices. Unless you educate people to understand what they're seeing and to make sure that by default the news feed is not being manipulated in order to target specific advertisements that takes advantage of your religion, of your political beliefs, of your sexual orientation, then I think we're gonna still be left behind, because we haven't understood exactly, identified the main problem, which was the manipulation of the perception to create uncertainty and lead people to vote with a different understanding of the world, or a different, at least, of some other people. So they see a different content. And I think that's why I mentioned we should move fast, we should understand the technology and try to put and set up the right principles there in order to give full control to the citizens and allow them to use the applications, but not overuse their data to make profits, sell them, and then this could lead to discrimination, this could lead to any kind of consequences that we as politicians have to protect them from.
Larry Magid in California, it would appear to me that these 2.7 million Europeans are safe. They are home and dry when it comes to their data, what they will how they will react to, say, advertising, how they will react to echo chamber conversations. But that's just 2.7 million Europeans. There are surely other Europeans who were in the United States, say, when this was all going on. So how do you come up with global legislation, such as the legislation that Eva is involved with, to make everyone that uses Facebook as safe as these 2.7 million Europeans?
Well, first of all, I want to make a general comment about legislation. I certainly agree with the comment Eva made about principles, but it's very difficult for regulators to micromanage companies. What we need are principles that can last for potentially decades about privacy and security that are independent of the specific technologies, because technologies will change very quickly, but general principles can last for a long time. As per global regulations, well, the good news is that the GDPR, even though it only affects Europe, actually is having an impact globally, because some of these companies, at least, are trying to apply GDPR on an international level, because it's actually easier for them to have one set of rules for the entire population than to have to break it down country by country. And the same is true, for example, with the Children's Online Privacy Protection Act in the United States. It doesn't affect directly any other country, but most of the internet service providers have complied with it globally. So I think that we're all benefiting through GDPR, but having said that, I know there will continue to be discussions in Washington about ways the U.S. can tighten our privacy laws. That's inevitable. I think Mark Zuckerberg realizes it. His goal, I think, is to try to make it so it doesn't hurt his business, but they all know it's coming. And I think Europe set the pace for the entire world.
Nishanth, it may sound like a slightly idiotic question, but is there anything that one can do to make oneself safer here? I mean, when this scandal broke, 1.8 million Australians deleted their accounts. But off the back of that, we discovered that 66% of Facebook users don't know how to set their privacy settings. And if you look at the Facebook screen, even if you want to log off your account, Eva's nodding, she's obviously gone through the same process. If you want to log off your account, you have to go to that small triangle, top right-hand side. And if you're on your iPad or your iPhone, it's difficult. So you maybe leave yourself logged in even more. And at the end of the day, Mark Zuckerberg, surely, Nishanth, wants you to be logged in for as long as possible, because Facebook is a multi-billion-dollar company and he wants to monetize you, a user, as a resource.
Sure. I mean, so just to the last point about us being the product, that is certainly the case today. And with legislation such as GDPR and other things, that proposition is sort of drying up a little bit, right? So it presumably in the near future, we're going to start seeing new business models for new internet companies, or even for old internet companies, to reinvent themselves, such that we are not the product, but rather the service they're offering is the product, as it should be. But going back again to what you were saying, yes, it is extremely difficult today for even well-informed users. So one of the things that I've been trying to do since GDPR is every new website that I visit, I make sure to see what their policy is and what kind of cookies are they storing on me and so forth. So this is information that I could have figured out before, but was not so easy to figure out before. And now a new sort of a pop-up comes up for me that says, are you okay that I'm collecting such and such cookies? And I go through and figure out what the cookies are. And it is a tedious process. It's actually affecting my work, because I'm no longer able to browse in the same seamless way that I used to before, right? So even with things like consent, that doesn't necessarily go far enough in preserving the same kind of browsing experience that we used to have before. And again, so this is because of the advertising-based business model that we have, and it's also because with social platforms, it becomes even more difficult to think about what does privacy mean. So if I give access to the entire world to see a photograph of me and my friends, would my friends who happen to be in the picture be okay with that? How do they prevent that from happening if they're not okay with that? So these are difficult, thorny questions, and somehow Zuckerberg and co have to figure out ways around this, and they are going forward, but not quickly enough.
Okay, Eva Kaili in Brussels. I mean, still, surely it's the case Facebook doesn't seem to want to admit or concede what it actually is. It's not some organization at the vanguard of freedom. Is it a news organization? Is it a broadcaster? Is it, I've used the phrase before on the show, an echo chamber for people's, your friends' opinions? And, you know, other broadcasters, other publishers are monitored. People do monitor them because they've got to, because there are legal issues to do with that. And yet Facebook wants to still be above all that, perhaps.
Well, the legislation for social platforms and the responsibilities to businesses especially is now here in the European Union. So I'm going to work on this file, and I will try to make sure that at least citizens are safe and they understand how these platforms use their data, but also businesses to be able to use the applications, but with clear rules. And that's why I think GDPR was important, because as you mentioned, these cannot fit the old definitions. What Facebook and other platforms are is something new. I would like the word ecosystem of different services actually, and we have to adapt our legislation to what they offer. So mainly, as I said, we have to make sure that it's grandma friendly. The explanation is as easy for everyone to understand as it would be for somebody that uses for the first time the internet. So we have to make sure that it's clear and that you have many options. So to be able to say, yes, I want to use this application, I can use the minimum of it because I want to use it, but the rest of my data, either I share with you because I know you're going to use it for good, for science, for health, or I'm going to sell them to you, but no, you will not have access without my knowledge and my control. And also to be able to deny access to third parties, because it could be your insurance company. And if you Google search a chronic disease, maybe you're excluded and suddenly you don't know why. You can be discriminated and you don't even know why. So basically, we have to establish specific rules of which kind of data are sensitive and private and should not be used, and then to give more options to the citizens. So the platforms are ready to follow the rules once we are sure and certain that we will ask them to. So for me, I believe we have a lot of work to do. And since there are no borders on the internet, like you saw with GDPR, if you want to work in Europe, and most of the big companies actually do want to offer the services here, they have to comply. We have the right to be forgotten, and we have the right to information, we have the right to privacy, and we have to find these new balances between the rights that we have. So it's an ongoing process, but mainly we have to learn from what happened and make sure that people will not be manipulated, especially in sensitive issues like political decisions and religion issues.
Understood. I just want to boil that point down for a second and put that to Larry Magid in California. Larry, clearly the essence of what we're discussing here when it comes to these 2.7 million people in Europe is pushback. But how do you strike the balance? I mean, it is faintly ridiculous because, for example, the Chicago Tribune website, a perfectly reputable newspaper website, you can't see it in Europe. Then you put up a VPN and you can see it in Europe. I mean, how does that work?
Well, first of all, I've been on the Facebook Safety Advisory Board for a number of years so far, and these conversations come up all the time. And I just want to make it clear that often it's nuanced. For example, I agree that there should be a lot of privacy controls, but the more privacy controls you add, the more complicated they become. So that there's a trade-off between simplicity and control. And I'm not suggesting that Facebook couldn't do a better job. I know they could, but these are things that Facebook and their advisors have been struggling with for years. I also want to point out that consumer education is critical. You can have the safest platform in the world, but if people aren't using it in a safe way, then their information is going to be getting into the wrong hands, because ultimately social media is about sharing. And the question isn't whether we share our information. I wouldn't have any use for Facebook if I weren't using it to reach out to my friends and share information. The question is, how do we keep control over our information yet still have the ability to share it? And with that freedom to share means we have the freedom to go too far if we're not careful. So it's a balance. There's government has a role, obviously industry has a role, but the rest of us have a role, and that's where I think consumer education is so important.
Nishanth, in London, using social media and trusting it without question, have those days now gone?
Well, I think you'll find that there are people who have very, very different conceptions of what privacy means and what privacy means to them. There are still a number of people who don't care that much about their privacy. Oftentimes the argument that you hear being made is, I don't have anything to hide, so why do I need to care about privacy? There are others who are privacy extremists and who might go to great lengths to keep themselves private from these big, huge companies, right? So given the spectrum of different kinds of users that there are, there's not going to be a single right balance, and which is why you need users to have more control over exactly how their data is being stored and what are the services that are being offered in return for or in exchange for a certain lack of privacy. So the fact that a website can be tailored to your needs, can be tailored to the way you want it to look, and the functionality that you want it to be there, it necessarily entails a loss of privacy. The website needs to know a bit more about you and login details and so forth. So, but maybe others don't actually want that. They could have a much more generic-looking website without actually having to log in. And so this is the kind of balance where users need to exercise control. But on the other hand, if you give too much control, as the previous speaker was saying, it could end up being decision fatigue. If each website, as I'm doing now, if each website I need to go in and look and see what cookies are there, what cookies do I need to allow, what am I comfortable with doing, that actually is a huge mental and cognitive load, which takes away from the rich experience that we get from browsing the internet and from getting all the information that we've been getting and the way our lives have been transformed. So it's a very, very delicate line, and I don't envy the job that the legislators have, whether in Europe or outside, but it's something where we need to think beyond these knee-jerk reactions to, oh, Cambridge Analytica happened, so how do we prevent that from happening? Sure, Cambridge Analytica is not going to happen yet again. Something else is going to happen. So you need to come up with broader principles, broader things which last the test of time and work for all these different people and their different conceptions of privacy and their different needs.
Eva, in the context of that decision fatigue that Nishanth is talking about there out of London, is what we're seeing a birthing pain for Facebook? And if Facebook is reinventing itself, can it reinvent itself with Mark Zuckerberg at the top?
Well, basically, as I said, when you have the principles, then they saw that they will follow these principles once we have them out there and we are clear on what we ask. And let me say also that we are these days voting also for copyrights. This means there will be an obligation for the big platforms on like YouTube to pay the producers of the content for their copyrights in a more direct and transparent way. So also the journalists, whoever provides content. So we are slowly building up a very concrete legislation based on principles that will allow freedom of the internet.
Okay, Eva, I'm going to interrupt you there, for which I apologize. Last word to Larry in California. Yeah. Clearly, Larry, this is the starting point for where social media is going. What's the end point that we're going to get to?
Well, ideally, the end point is that people are going to feel comfortable, like they get control of their own social media. They have complete transparency of where their data is and who has access to it. And they can enjoy sharing with the education and the knowledge that they need to limit what they share if they want privacy. But at the same time, they can take advantage of all the great features that social media offers.
Okay. Thank you all very much for your time today here on Inside Story. Thanks to our guests, Larry Magid in California, Nishanth Sastry, who joined us from London, and Eva Kaili, who joined us out of Brussels. And thank you to you too for watching the program over the past half hour. You can see the show again anytime on the website aljazeera.com. And for further discussion, do check out our Facebook page. That's facebook.com/AJ Inside Story. You can also join the conversation on Twitter. Our handle is @AJ Inside Story, or tweet me, I'll tweet you back. I'm @PeterDobbie1. From me, Peter Dobbie, and everyone on the team here in Doha. Thanks for watching. We'll see you soon. Bye-bye.